still with me all the time.
That we can offer this program to you folks tonight. We have a special guest, Frank Trusdell. He's with the U.S. Geological Survey, and he worked this last Mauna Loa eruption. Worked hard, I'm sure. But he's here to share with you about Mauna Loa, and also that we always need to be prepared. Right?
Okay, welcome. I want to start with up here in the front we had some materials. All these materials are free for the taking on this side. All of these that are over here are laminated. You're welcome to look at, but don't take them, and if you want, you can get copies of these from the web. Okay, so I'm a geologist at the U.S. Geological Survey's Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. And the last time Mauna Loa erupted was 38 years ago. When I was a graduate student, I worked on the eruption prior in 1984. So I got to kind of bookend my career, so to speak, by two different eruptions from Mauna Loa. Okay, so I also want to mention the fact that the materials that you're going to see here are not only the work of myself, but includes work from the entire observatory. So this isn't my doing, this is our doing. And any errors that you hear tonight are solely my responsibility. Okay, so Mauna Loa is the world's largest active volcano. It comprises just over 50% of the island of Hawaii. And Mauna Loa, as far as hazards is concerned, has a far reach. So Mauna Loa can reach all the way down to Hilo, the entire southern half of the island of Hawaii. And also it can reach between Hualalai and Mauna Kea all the way down to Kiholo Bay out to Puʻuhonua. So the concern of Mauna Loa erupting is big for the entire island. Because even though you may not live on the flanks of Mauna Loa, the impacts of its lava flows can alter the economy, can alter the way of life that people have on the island. Okay, so we're going to look at some data pre-eruption. On the top, we're looking at earthquake counts, and on the bottom, we're looking at GPS line across the summit caldera. And if you see the motion of the line or the data moving in this way, that means the line is moving apart. We use that as a proxy for the volcano is swelling. So let's start at the top. We're looking at basically from 2000 all the way up to the present. In 2004, we had over several months of many thousands of earthquakes. And these earthquakes were very deep. And at that time we thought, well, maybe Mauna Loa will erupt then. And eventually that seismicity died off. This small level or tiny quantity of earthquakes in the middle there is what we call background. So that's the background seismicity. And then in 2013, we started ramping up with some activity, and across the top you see the bar, and these bars are the state of the volcano. So green is everything's okay, yellow means we're a little concerned, orange means the volcano is showing signs that an eruption is almost imminent, and red is the volcano is erupting. So we went through a long period of green, then we started ramping up with earthquakes. We changed the advisory. And then the volcano had a sort of a decrease in seismic activity, and you can see correspondingly. Correspondingly, these line lengths went flat. So we go during the green period, it's flat, seismicity picks up, the line length changes, it goes flat, and then eventually it starts ramping up towards the recent activity. So at that time, when it started ramping up in September of last year, the observatory decided that it was time for us to go out and start informing the communities around the island. And those of you that live here are probably really familiar with this map in the lower left. And the warmer the color means the quicker that lava flows can come to your neighborhood. So these areas over here, located in red or shown by the red color, are those areas that we started to target when we saw that seismicity pick up. Because those people will have only a matter of hours to respond once the eruption moves into their geographic region. So we went out there and we basically messaged that looks like Mauna Loa is reawakening. We answered questions and we encouraged people to be prepared. Okay, so now we're going to look specifically at the events leading up to the eruption. There was increase in seismicity and deformation. And again, we're looking at the number of earthquakes per day. Here we're looking at the GPS time series across the summit, and then we're looking at the tilt meter. And the tilt meter sits there adjacent to the summit crater, and when it starts to inflate, then the tilt meter tilts away from the place that's inflating. And this over here is a time series of earthquakes, and we're looking at color code to show depth. So we're looking at depths under the volcano. The orange is intermediate, and these down here are deep earthquakes. And you can see from the start of the time series on the left, you can actually see between the individual events. And as you move closer and closer to the eruption, you get denser and denser clusters of activity. So in September was when we went out, when we saw increased seismic activity, where we went out to the communities. At that point, the volcano started to inflate. And then the tilt meter also. So these were all signs that we used that the volcano is reawakening. And then, much to our surprise, it kind of went, you see the background levels here are only about 20. Didn't really retreat to the low levels of 20 earthquakes per day. It stayed at a modest rate in here. And talking to one of my seismic colleagues, the algorithm that we use to create this doesn't really capture the full extent of the number of earthquakes that were happening at this time. And in fact, the earthquakes were 2 or 3 times higher than what's actually displayed on this graph. So if it's 2 to 3 times higher, we're talking about hundreds of earthquakes per day. And the inflation continued. And just before the eruption, the volcano went back down to only about 20 or 40 earthquakes a day. And if we look back at the previous 2 times in which Mauna Loa erupted, and we only look back to 2 previous times because that's the time period in which the volcano was well monitored. Prior to that, there weren't instrumentation all across the island. And in those 2 prior times, just before the outbreak, the volcano does sort of a pause, like it's going to psych you out, And then, lo and behold, we have this kind of an activity. So we're looking at an old seismograph. You can look here. Very few earthquakes just prior to the outbreak. And this yellow bar right here is represented by this upper bar. We call that a spectrogram. The important thing about this is the more intense the color, the more intense the seismic activity here. So you can see we have a pretty intense sequence of events. We went from a few earthquakes to an earthquake swarm. And that means each one of these peaks that you see is the onset of an initial earthquake. And before that earthquake energy can go down to zero, another one punches in and overwrites the one prior to that. And then pretty soon, there's so much activity that this whole thing is red. And that's what we see down here. Then when the magma starts moving through the ground, we get seismic tremor. And tremor is the magma moving through a crack, and the crack is just starting to oscillate. Whenever we see an earthquake swarm is when we're going to go ahead and say, oh, we're in orange now, an eruption is imminent. We see the tremor, we're going to red. And these are the earthquake counts here on the bottom. Okay, so the summit phase begins. So the swarm begins 45 minutes before the actual onset of the eruption. The eruption started at 11:21 p.m. on the 27th, and HBO then changed the color code. Here we have a thermal camera view of the start of the eruption. You're going to see a little bit of extra yellow glow in there. The magma came across the summit. Now, one of the things that even though we had the webcams at the summit, you notice that this side over here is hard to see anything. Once the gas came out of the ground and there's lots of moisture and particles coming out, and it's cold up there, guess what? That induced snow. And so we couldn't see any of this part of the caldera because it was starting to snow, induced by the eruption. You see that little bit of yellow glow there? And then all of a sudden, boom, the fissures cut across the caldera floor. Okay, so here's another view. Here's those fountains. And these fountains are on the order of, let's say, 60 to almost 100 meters tall. So a football field standing on end is the highest of these fountains. The activity started off the screen where we couldn't see, and then migrated into view of the camera. Okay? So, right after the summit phase started, it's very characteristic of Mauna Loa flows. And this happened in 1984, it happened in 1975, it happened in 1926, it happened in 1933, it happened in 42. Eruption starts in the caldera on the southern side of what you can see from that webcam view. Then it propagates to the south. And everybody's going, oh, it's going to Kona! You know, all these views from the island, and now we got social media. So social media is lighting up. We're in there talking to the mayor, and the mayor's like, we got to order an evacuation of the south side of the island. You saw where I had the red polygon in the previous map, and they say the transit time of the flows are quick. Well, social media was blowing up with all this stuff. Here's the views. If you stand at the Kona Pier and you look up on Mauna Loa, you can actually see the south side of the caldera. And that's what these people are seeing. They're seeing those flows that are still in the caldera, but they're glazing the flank. The historical record has said that those flows never reach populated areas. In fact, the ones that we map go no more than 10 miles away from the summit. So here we are, this is the camera on the Southwest Rift Zone, and I'm monitoring this at 1 and 2 in the morning, and we're talking to the mayor. And the mayor's saying, we gotta evacuate. And I'm saying, I'm looking at the cameras, And there's these flows high on the flank that are from the South Caldera. They're not coming down this rift zone. Otherwise, we say, time to evacuate. So we said, no. Just be cautious. This happens. It's normal. Okay. Lo and behold, the fissures then turned around and went down the other direction. So this is a view from the northeast side looking to the south. This portion of the caldera was the part obscured in those webcam views. What you saw were the fountains and the flows moving in this direction across. So at 6:30 a.m., this is the webcam view where we got in the helicopter around 6:30. All of that had stopped. There wasn't any more red rock there. Now we're looking helicopter view of the southwest rift zone. There's the summit caldera, Mauna Loa. This is the fissures that cut down to the south caldera portion. When we got there, there were no active flows, but there still was some steaming there. We consider this area approximately in here and Mauka, the summit caldera. This area in here, Makai, is southwest rift zone. The fissures propagated across into the northeast rift zone and started to move down that flank. So, glow on our webcams between 5 and 6 a.m. gave us the indication that indeed the lava had switched sides and was moving to the northeast. So those people in South Kona and the mayor and everybody can go like this. Right? It's not coming their way. There were 4 fissures along the northeast rift zone, and eventually the main eruptive loci was fissure 3. Here's a view of the fissures, one over here, and then this is fissure 2. So this is a view of fissure. This is also a view of, actually this is fissure 3. So this is 1, this is 2. Those of you familiar with the geography of Mauna Loa, this is Puʻuhonua right here. And this over here is Steaming Cone. And Steaming Cone was the eruptive vent in 1855. So this is the view of fissure 3. After the fissure, after time, a fissure eruption will centralize because it's more thermodynamically efficient to have a singular vent erupt. And so this is what ultimately that line of fissures out here centralized to one segment of that. Okay, this is Dewey Cone, and just I'm standing on a cone called Pukawahi, and this is fissure 4. And fissure 4 was short-lived, but to give you some sort of scale of the eruption, those 2 little dots right there are people, and there's a helicopter. So we're talking large, as we expect from the world's largest volcano. So the fissure then continued in this area, and you can see people right here on the ground working. Okay, and so some of the things we did was we would measure, for example, the flow velocity and all that, but I'll get to that eventually. Okay, so one of the things, of course, for us to do as our civic duty is to keep the civil defense appraised and all of the public about the whereabouts of the lava flows and what may be in hazard's way. And in the early part of this eruption, the weather and the geometry of the flows made mapping the actual outline of the lava flows very difficult. In 2018, it was a limited geographic area. The wind was blowing northeast trades. We could take the helicopter and kind of mosey along the flow and map out its extent, and then we come back and we make a nice, beautiful map. Well, in this case, what is happening is that the wind was blowing conas, going this direction. And that's the same direction the lava flows were. And helicopters and volcanic fume, they do not get along. So you don't want to take your helicopter because of the fume, but also because the large lava flows, the air is less dense and helicopters lose altitude as they fly over really hot objects. So that made challenging to map the flows. And of course, everybody was complaining. Instant gratification, HBO, you guys did such a great job mapping out the flows in 2018. And the summit caldera, where's the flows? Well, the weather, the lava flows, the geometry, the fume in the first few days was working against us. So we could track the vent location well because we could fly, but the fume, the volcanic smog is blowing right towards Mauna Loa. And we can't fly underneath them. So we had a series of dots and we made these maps, but we could track the flow front well enough to let the mayor know that the Daniel K. Inouye Highway was not threatened. Okay, so we move on. So as we're mapping the lava flows, when that was challenging, we actually had people on the ground using laser ranging devices. And from this distance, they can actually shoot all the way up to the cone and measure that distance with that laser ranging device. But they're mapping the flow front out in here, and this is what they're looking at, and they're tracking the flow front. We use satellite technology, but the satellite technology was also impacted by the weather. So if the weather was bad, we're not going to get any satellite views. So we set up a bunch of webcams and live streaming camera to help facilitate the tracking of the flows, but also scientific investigations. So this is an example of the kind of satellite technology that we were able to leverage. The easiest one to see here is that everything kind of in this grayish blue color are the brand new lava flows that happen. We weren't able to see this early in the morning on the first day. Actually, we could fly over that and see it, but we did not map it as accurately as shown here by the satellite. This is the summit caldera region. You can see that not entirely the entire floor, like most in 1984, most of the entire floor was paved over. This did not happen here, and then you can see Fissure 3. This is a little bit more difficult, but you can actually see the channel system that came out of these and fed the lava flows down slope. Now, another piece of technology that we were able to leverage is the fact that we have these GIS mapping software. And when the weather improved, we turned the software on and we actually go and fly along the flow and make these different outlines. And each one of these lines represent different periods of time as the flow advanced down slope. But the beauty of this thing was that once we came and mapped out the tip of the flow, we would say, send the data. The data would go to the cloud, they would blast down to civil defense and our offices, and you can make an instantaneous map. The map would be there in near real time. To give you an idea of how thick these flows are getting to the Saddle Road, you can see this person standing here. This flow is about 8 meters. And as the flow moved further Mackay and closer to Saddle Road, it got as thick as 20 meters. 20 meters. Just think of telephone pole height. That tall. Okay, and then again, like I said, we also had cooperators with us, and NASA came and flew along there, and they provided elevation data. So not only did they be able to map out the thickness, I mean the extent of the flows, we could get elevation, how thick the lava flows were. And you can see in these yellow areas, they're at least 20 meters thick. Now the eruptive volume that we got from looking at this elevation model is about 150 million cubic meters. And the effusion rate that we measured was on the order of about 100, but it depends on where you measured it, you get different velocities. But we take this information and put it into flow models, and then we simulate lava flows, and we can do things like how far will the flows go? What direction will they take? So these are all inputs for that kind of thing. And so sometimes we're on the ground actually measuring these things by standing next to the channel and measuring the width and then measuring the flow velocity. And then when you see a bus-like rock come and then roll over, you can get inference for the depth. Okay, so there we go. You're at the channel there, and you're looking at this thing, which is bigger than a car, floating down the channel there. And it's moving at 8 meters per second. The channel's 12 meters wide. And we figured it was about 3 meters deep. And you can see the effusion rate is 200 meters per second. Okay, now we also leverage UAS. So we have a drone, we have permission to fly the drones, and here we are, we have this aerial view, and we see another one of these lava bergs or lava walls or whatever you want to call them, and they're coming down the channel, and the velocity is just about the same. So we basically measure the distance along the channel, and we take something like that, and we track it moving over that distance, and that's how we get the velocities. Okay, so we got better and better at mapping the flow fronts, and we're tracking them. And then also on the right-hand side is we took those inputs that we got about flow velocity and such, and plugged them into computer models, and then we say run, show us where the flows are going to go, and it pretty much tracks there, and it also is tracking the thickness of these lava flows. Now, the other thing that's in our toolbox is that we use thermal mapping. So here we have Matt Patrick, he's got a thermal camera there. He's mapping the extent of the flow fields here, and the brighter the colors is basically looking at the distribution of where the temperature intensity is greater. So the warmer the color, the higher the temperature. But mostly what we're tracking here is the distribution system, the lava channels. How is the lava getting from the vent down flow? And you can see the progress of the flows as they go. And now this is another model simulation, and this is showing the advance of the lava flows for 2 weeks after the start of the eruption. So this was actually looking into the future and saying, this is what we anticipate the lava flow to be doing when it hit down here. And you can see it got close to the saddle road. And as it came down into that topography, when you drive across the saddle there, you notice it's pretty flat. And so the flatness of that is actually good in a sense for if you're worried about the hazards. Because the flows slow down, the flows start to spread out, and if they start to spread out, the amount of volume is wasted in spreading instead of the thrust of it getting out to the highway quicker. Okay, so here's a video that we set up, and I said we use these videos to help us track. And this one is from Mauna Loa. So we set this up, and you can watch surges come down the different systems. So when you see brightness coming down there, those are surges. Look at this flow over here. And you can see the flow front advancing with these surges coming down. Okay, so the other thing that we were interested in doing was sampling and taking samples of the chemistry of the lava. And so we're here taking the samples, and sampling the lava, because the chemistry can tell us some things about what's going on. So during this period of time, we collected 79 samples. They were collected along the fissure system and down the active lava flows. And what we wanted to do was to see how the composition changes as it goes down the length of the lava flow. But we're also interested in what kind of changes we might see across the fissure system. And then at Fissure 3, the vent, we actually collected a time series. Every hour or so we collected a suite of samples. And those samples then can inform us about where's the source of the magma. Where is it coming from? Way deep in the earth. How much time has it been stored within the volcano? And then we are looking for evidence by taking time series whether or not new lava is mixing with old lava. So old lava would be a pot of lava left over from a prior eruption. And so you can have new lava come in, mix with old lava, make hybrid. And we also can get, for example, what's the temperature of the lava by looking at the chemistry. So the samples that we collected, if you look at them, this is a near vent sample. And all of these black pukas that you see are the vesicles, the air pockets in there. And then you see tiny little minerals in between this area, and most of this nondescript is what we call volcanic glass. And here we have a flow from the distal end of the lava flow, and you can see there's a whole bunch of tiny little minerals in there. And these minerals in here then impact what we call the ability of the lava to flow. The more minerals you have, the more impedance these crystals have for the flow to actually advance. It increases its viscosity, makes it much more pasty. So, as we sampled across the summit, we found that the chemistry was uniform across the entire eruption. Everything was the same. Every day we sampled, whether it was the first day, the last day, the fissure on the south caldera side, the one on the northeast, all the same. The temperature of the lava right here is 1137. If you're looking at Kilauea, we're looking at 1150s for its temperature. There were no minerals in there, no olivine, no granulates, no minopyroxene. 38 years ago was the last eruption. You think if you had a batch of lava sitting in there, you would crystallize something? You saw nothing. The microphenocryst increased as you went downflow. This has impacts for the flowland, the length of possibly how long the eruption is going to last, and implications for hazards. Okay, now we're going to look at the ground deformation. I showed you the ramping up to the eruption, and what we're looking at here are two satellite views. And you go, wow, that kind of looks like a poster from the 60s. But anyway, here's the summit caldera, and I've taken the numbers to show you what happened across the summit. This area and this area, this area and this area deflated by 30 centimeters and 22 centimeters. This area along the northeast rift zone, where the magma went from the summit into the rift, inflated by 24 and 8 centimeters. So that's just one satellite view. Here's another satellite view. The caldera is cut off. But that material that translocated from the summit into the flank increased the elevation of that area by 34 centimeters. About that much. Okay, what did the gas do? Well, the gas emissions initially went skyrocketing high. To compare that to what happened in 2018, in 2018 there was about 200 kilotons of sulfur dioxide emitted. We started the eruption, it went up to 500, and as the eruption waned, so did the sulfur dioxide. Sulfur dioxide concentrations went down. This is looking at the seismicity. Back to that spectrogram. The more intense the colors, the more intense the seismic activity. We're looking at a seismogram from November 28th. You can see all this intense color here associated with the seismic swarm. And then we're looking at December the 13th. And you can see it's all blue. Basically, if you think that, if you use the analogy that the seismicity is the heartbeat of the volcano, volcano's almost DOA. All right, so the summary of the eruption, we had 150 million cubic meters erupted. Along the northeast rift zone, the average value is about 165 million and the median is 175. We're right in the ballpark for northeast rift zone eruptions. The area covered, and these numbers that I'm using to reflect this current eruption are preliminary. 38 square kilometers of area was covered. The average is 40 for the northeast rift zone. The median is 38, right in the ballpark. The fountains were greatly diminished after the 10th, and activity was restricted to within the vent. The eruption duration was 12 days, sort of in the same ballpark for northeast rift zone eruptions based on the historical record. So what do I deem successes? We were able to call the start of the eruption. So we said the volcano's imminently going to erupt, and then we said it's erupting. And we called that ahead of time. We actually went out and started our messaging after the flurry of earthquakes in September and started to tell people, you should be concerned. Pay attention. Start watching our messaging. We were able to collect a whole plethora of different kinds of data associated for that. And there's more work to be done on this, and so we anticipate more discoveries, more ideas on how the volcano works. And one of the things that I primarily had been working on prior to the eruption, a long time before, was this idea of these lava inundation zones, and that's what these maps are here. And this purple line right here is the lava inundation zone. And you can see that the flow came right on down that line. And so it could have gone away, or it could turn towards Hilo. And we needed a few more days of eruption to actually be able to say definitively which direction it flows. And of course the impacts of which way flows go, and if the duration is long, a whole different story in terms of hazards and risks. I'm sure there are other successes that I didn't mention. But anyway, there is another volcano awareness talk. It's next week. And it'll be about Kilauea Summit. So at this point, I'm Paul, and if anybody has any questions, I'll entertain them. Okay. Let's start with this.
I was curious, how did the fusion rate and total volume of discharge compare to the 84 eruption and also the 2018 Kilauea eruption?
Okay, so the question is, how does this volume of this compare to the last Mauna Loa eruption and then the eruption of Kilauea? the last eruption of Mauna Loa in '84 was 220 million, and the preliminary number we have here is 150 million. Okay, so in that way, within the uncertainty of the mapping and all of that, we would probably say they're comparable. The Kilauea eruption is on the order of 500 million, and some estimates are even higher than that, up to 800 plus million. Now, what happened there was basically erupted low on the flank, and you discharged or drained the entire reservoir from the summit and pushed it out the reservoir. So this was a relatively high on the flank eruption. I don't know what would happen if it all broke out, let's say, in Kulani or, let's say, above ocean.
So was the flow following a channel then? Is that what you're saying? It couldn't quite, I mean, like it looked like it was following a straight channel until it got down there and started to spread out.
All right, you're not talking about that last map I showed.
Well, just the one that went almost to South Road.
Yeah. No, that flow just made its own path. It started erupting, and because it's microtopography does not influence it. And what I mean is something like this or this chair or something, doesn't care. It'll just go right over it, no problem. If it's pahoihoi, it'll bump against this curve, and then it'll flow up, and then it'll over top it. So that lava flow that happened just came down and overrode both and pahoihoi flows. Sometimes it went in channel, sometimes it went out. It created its own path, and it pretty much followed the topography downstream.
So when it got down, when it was getting close to the South Road
Yeah.
and spreading out,
Yeah.
what were you predicting was going to go down the South Road? What did you think it was going to do?
Okay, so I'm intimately familiar with the topography down there. I'm intimately familiar with the topography at the tip of the flow. To the west was the pahoihoi flows that had tumuli as big as this building. And to the east was a big old flow that was at least as high as the eaves over there. So it would have been forced to have been channelized until it got right down there close to the Saddle Road. And it might have been that those two pieces of topography forced it to advance to the south. I don't know that for certain, because you never know if it stalled well enough and you had sufficient supply, what's going to happen is it's going to jump the channel and it's going to make a brand new lava flow. But if it continued straight ahead with its existing toe, it would have encountered topography. Not until it got to almost Saddle Road, where you're driving on that black lava flow before you turn and go around the Puʻuhonua State Park. That area is nice and flat in there. It could have shoved it the flow's helo direction. But initially, that toe would have gotten all the way to Saddle Road. That's the greatest concern. Once it's done after that, the road's blocked. The major artery across the island is kaput, and then, you know, we got all kinds of issues if you cut any of the roads around here. Okay, let's have somebody in the back and then you up front.
High little Kona area.
Yeah.
Swim outside, like play outside, work outside. How toxic is this air?
Sorry, you gotta repeat your question?
Okay, simple question. How bad is the air that we're breathing?
Oh, and the one? Guess what? I got a brochure for you. It talks about air pollution. And there are websites where you can go and look at forecasts for how much gas is there. And they can tell you, based on the levels of gas, what kinds of activities that you should or should not be doing outside.
Is that website on that page?
It should be, and if not, then you come to the HBO webpage and we'll shunt you to that website and provide other information about logging. Okay, somebody over here has a question. You-
I have two questions. The first one, I know that Iceland is trying to change the flow of some lava, and I wondered if you guys had a plan for discussing options for not getting it accelerated. And the second question, I just wondered if, I don't know the right word for this, Hawaiian culture or religious belief about volcanoes, is that any part of your decision?
Okay, so I'll do the first one because that one's easy. Are we going to divert any lava flow? You want to see the ultimate cop-out? That's not our kuleana. You gotta talk to the mayor and the governor, and all we do is advise them of things like, well, our flow models show that in a couple of days it can reach the saddle, or our physical measurements on the ground show lava's coming to the road. And so, is it possible to divert lava flow? The answer is in other places around the globe, most specifically the Italians have done some lava diversion. And they save something of high value. So like a hospital, in their case, they had this gondola system that was taking things up the mountain, and it was the only facility there on the mountain. And there was nothing around it, so they figured they divert it, they save the gondola, and that's okay, it's going to go somewhere else, and it's not going to really hurt anything. In places where the topography is so flat, you know, in 1960, they tried to divert the 1960 lava flow, and they kept piling up lava against the flow. And the material that they were piling up was less dense than the flow, and it actually burrowed underneath and came out the other side. But the other thing is, if you stack something up against it and you got sufficient amount of volume, like I used the analogy of the boy, it'll just start filling up higher and higher, and at some point it just overtop that barrier and go. So if you want to have high rate of success of diverting lava flow, you got to do it where the topography is steepest. Because it's down in the flats, you got almost no good chance of success. But, like I said, that's a decision made somewhere else. That's not ours to make.
There was no discussion.
Let's say I was not privy to any of those discussions. Okay. The second part is, does me as a part native Hawaiian, does that influence my science? Only in the sense that I'm cognizant of my culture and the things that I do, and I have to remain pono, but it does not discharge me of doing anything that I do without scientific integrity. Okay? Right. Yeah.
So the chart you showed earlier, that's pretty popular one, the red zone and the other color zone,
Yeah.
kind of mid-south corner or whatever
Right.
is red.
Yeah.
That's relative to the rate of the flow or the time it would take if the flow cut which it came this way, right?
Correct.
That's a time series thing, not a danger other than the time it takes to get here.
That's right.
And then
Yeah.
if the amount of lava that went towards the Inouye Highway came this way,
Yeah.
how much time would we have had?
How much time if we,
What would we have had if that much lava came towards us instead
Yeah.
of the other way?
well, in 1950, they hit the ocean in 3 hours. And in 1919, I believe it was 24 hours. In 1926, it was 4 days. So my question to you is, can you pack up your house and move everything you own in 4 days?
I've already had it.
No, I mean, that map was specifically a function of the potential transit time for a vent to open and lava flows arriving where people live. That's all it's based on. It's not a forecast to say, you guys are the most likely to get run over next. It was just, hey, you guys live in an area, it's complicated. You know, the topography is steep, diffusion rates are usually much higher. And so, question. And then pretty soon we gotta go because these guys like go home.
Okay. So we got to view it from Volcano Golf Course area.
Yeah.
And we could see it like popping up, kind
Yes.
of going like this.
Yeah.
So how high was that?
Okay, I didn't show it, but you see this fountain is one of those ones that were pretty high. So this cone is 30 meters high. And this is nearly double that at least. It's probably 1.5 times higher. So let's just say it's 30 plus another half, that's 70 meters. And that's, to this part, that's continuous. And then there's another 30 meters or so of the part that separates it. So we're talking football field and a half high.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I saw it that night. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody good?
Hey guys, hold on, let's get a little light on this here. Hey! Let's fix that. There we go. Make one more little adjustment. Alright, where are you?
I'm gone. You covered me up. It's okay, baby.
What are you doing there?
Yeah,
Hey
you
guys,
can.
thanks for joining us.
You can't see
We've
me.
been over,
He blocked me out, you guys, but you can hear me though.
We're over on the Kona side.
Oh,
Oh, there you are. We're over on the Kona side of the island. Had a good meeting tonight with Frank and a talk on about Mauna Loa. It sounds like the next one's going to be coming up will be about Kilauea, which will be interesting. Thanks for joining us. See you at the next one. Do we know what we're doing on the way home? Could we be doing no spoilers. Thanks for joining. Hit that thumbs up on the way out, guys. We'll catch you guys for the next one.
We go to our, just like the Mauna Loa invitation map.
Give me something good. I get wasted on the thought of you. Head is spinning, I can't move. Smoky eyes in a groove. No, I can't get you out of my mind. You're still with me all the time.